Woman feeds black man for years, then learns. He's a decorated military hero at her wedding. The scream echoed across the manicured garden like a crack through glass. Oh my God! Who let that man in? Eleanor Harper froze mid-step, her veil fluttering behind her as every head in the garden turned toward the wrought-iron gate. The music stuttered to a halt. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. For a moment, time held its breath. There he was. The man no one ever noticed. The man everyone dismissed. The man Eleanor had brought food to for nearly 2 years without ever hearing him speak a single word. He stood at the gate wearing a pressed, though clearly aged, navy blue suit. His boots, once scuffed and torn, were polished to a quiet gleam. Around his neck, the same forest green scarf Elena had given him during a freezing morning last winter. In his hands, nothing but stillness, no bag, no invitation. Just presence. Elena's heart thundered in her chest. She didn't need to ask how he found the venue. She didn't need to explain to anyone why he was here, because deep down, even if she didn't want to admit it, not to Tom, not to her mother, not even to herself, she had hoped he would come, hoped with a quiet desperation that bordered on fear. A murmur rippled through the crowd like static. Is she walking toward him? She invited a homeless man to her wedding. Does Tom know? And from the front row, a sharp gasp. Elena! Her mother snapped, standing so abruptly, her chair nearly toppled behind her. Get back here! But Elena kept walking. She had no bouquet, no escort. No orchestral swell behind her, only gravel crunching beneath her white heels and the relentless pull in her chest. When she reached him, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. She extended her hand. He looked at it for the briefest moment, then slowly took it in his. And together, they turned, back toward the aisle, toward the stunned crowd. And in that silence, richer than any music, they walked. But this wasn't where the story began. It started much quieter. It started long before invitations and dresses and aisles and disbelief. It started behind a bakery. Elena Harper was 29, quiet and unremarkable in the ways people often overlooked. She wore her honey-blonde hair in a low bun, kept her makeup minimal, and dressed more for function than style. She owned a cozy little coffee shop on the edge of Meadow Ridge, a town that liked its lawns trimmed and its secrets buried. Eleanor opened shop before sunrise every morning. By 5 a.m., the ovens were already roaring, and the scent of cinnamon scones danced through the air. But every day, before she flipped the open sign, she packed a brown paper bag. Turkey sandwich, a banana or apple, a bottle of water, and a handwritten note. Always a note. Some said things like, "You matter," or "You are not forgotten." Others were just quotes she liked. Sometimes they were prayers. She'd walk around the back of the building, past the dumpsters, and gently place the bag beside the wooden bench where he always sat. He never looked up, never reached for the bag until she had disappeared around the corner. He never asked her name. She never asked his. But they knew each other. And that mattered more than names. Inside the cafe, however, her staff wasn't so quiet about it. "You're feeding him again?" asked Mandy, the 20-year-old barista who wore sarcasm like lipstick. Eleanor, unbothered, stirred her pitcher of oat milk. "Yes." Mandy raised an eyebrow. "You do realize he might not even be homeless, right?" "I heard he talks to no one." "That's sketchy." "He doesn't have to talk." "I mean, I just think it's weird. People are starting to ask." Elena glanced up. "Then let them." But not everyone let it go. Her mother, Victoria Harper, was a woman of polished pearls and pointed glances. When she visited the shop that Friday morning, she didn't waste time.
"Elena, sweetheart," she said, sipping her espresso. "We need to talk about this man."
Elena was wiping down the pastry case.
"What man?"
Her mother leaned in, whispering.
"The one you've been feeding behind your shop. The one everyone's whispering about." "Elena," Victoria continued, her voice lowering. "You're getting married in 3 weeks. What will people think?"
"You're building a future now, a reputation."
"I'm building a life," Elena said calmly, "not a brand."
Her mother's nostrils flared.
"Don't be smart. You're starting a family. You should be surrounding yourself with people who elevate you."
"He's not dragging me down. He's not bringing you up."
"He's surviving," Elena said flatly.
"That's enough," Victoria scoffed.
"He could be dangerous. He's kind. You don't know that." "I know how he looks at me," Elena said, finally turning. "And I know that in 2 years, he's never once asked me for anything."
Victoria stood, smoothing her designer coat.
"You're being naive." "No," Elena said quietly. "I'm being human."
That night she went home and couldn't sleep. Tom, her fiancé, lay beside her, his laptop open, blue light flickering across his face. "I heard your mom came by," he said casually.
"Yeah. And?" "She asked me to stop feeding the man behind the cafe."
Tom turned off his screen and faced her.
"What'd you say?"
"I said no."
Tom studied her. "You know I support you, right? I think what you do is beautiful, but you should be careful."
"He's not a threat."
"I'm not saying he is," Tom said gently. "I'm just saying, this is your wedding month. Let's not invite unnecessary attention."
Eleanor turned her gaze to the ceiling.
"What if I already did?" she whispered.
Tom frowned.
"Already did what?"
But she didn't answer. The next morning, just before dawn, she packed the bag with steadier hands. But this time, she added something else.
A white envelope. Inside, a note written on her own stationery. "You are welcome at my wedding. I would be honored to see you there. No address, no RSVP card." She just tucked it under the napkin and folded the bag shut. When she placed it beside him on the bench, he didn't look at her. But as she turned away, she felt it, the shift in the air. The moment something unseen passed between them, the first beat of a story that no one would believe. Because sometimes kindness plants a seed. And sometimes that seed grows into a storm. And sometimes that storm walks into your wedding and changes everything. It was a Monday morning, quiet and grey. Rain clung to the streets of Meadow Ridge like a second skin, soft and constant. Inside Elena's cafe, the warm scent of espresso and rising dough tried its best to fight the gloom. But something in the air had shifted, subtle, like a string pulled taut just beneath the surface. Elena Harper stood behind the counter, her eyes flicking between the register and the front door. Every time the little bell jingled, she looked up. But it was never him. The brown bag she had packed that morning sat untouched on the back bench. The napkin tucked inside bore no quote today, just 3 words. "Hope you come." He hadn't been there when she arrived. Not when she opened, not when she restocked the croissants. And now, 3 hours into the morning rush, his absence pressed on her like a weight she couldn't shake. "You okay?" asked Carla, the new hire with fire-orange hair and a sharper intuition than most gave her credit for. "Yeah," Eleanor said too quickly. "Just tired." "You sure?" "You keep looking out like you're expecting someone." Eleanor offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe I am." It wasn't until close to noon that the tension cracked. The back door opened with a low creak, and Elena slipped into the alley. The bench was still empty, but on the seat, carefully placed in the exact spot where she always left the bag, was something she'd never seen before. A small, folded white envelope. Her breath caught. She approached slowly, like the air had turned electric. Picking it up with trembling fingers, she turned it over. There was no name on the front. Inside, a note written in a shaky but precise hand. "Thank you for the invitation. I will be there. J.E.B." Elena stood there in the alley, rain misting her hair, the note burning in her hands. J.E.B. It was the first thing she'd ever learned about him. Initials. Proof of existence. A man made real. She slipped the note into her apron pocket and stood motionless for a long time. Behind her, inside the cafe, she could hear the murmur of customers and clinking cups. But she wasn't ready to rejoin that world yet. Not just yet. That night, she told Tom. They were eating dinner, roast chicken and sweet potatoes, seated across from each other like always. The TV played a rerun of some HGTV home makeover show, but neither of them was really watching. "I think he's coming," she said suddenly. Tom looked up from his plate. "Who?" "The man behind the cafe. I left him an invitation." "Today he left me a note." There was a long pause. "Elena?" Tom set his fork down. "You really think this is a good idea?" "I do. I just worry. People might not understand." "They don't need to." Tom studied her face. "Why does it matter so much to you?" And there it was, the question she'd been circling since the day she first handed him a sandwich in silence.
"I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe because he's the only person who's never asked anything of me."
Never expected me to be anything I'm not. Just saw me, without judgment. Tom leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "But you don't really know him. What if—" "I don't care." The words hung in the air. Tom exhaled slowly. "I just don't want you to get hurt, or embarrassed." She looked at him, eyes firm. "Then you should know. If anyone's embarrassed, it won't be me." He nodded, the tension between them stretching, then settling. He didn't push further. He never did. But she saw it in his eyes. He didn't understand, and maybe he never would. 2 days later, the letter came. Not from J.E.B., from the city. A typed notice folded neatly in a government envelope. A complaint had been filed. Someone had reported unauthorized loitering behind the cafe. Elena's heart sank as she read. The note was cold, clinical. "Please be advised that your establishment may be in violation of city code regarding safe and sanitary conditions. Continued allowance of vagrancy may result in citations or revocation of your permit." No signature, no contact name. Just a warning. She slammed the paper on the counter. Mandy, mid-frosting a muffin, glanced over. "Whoa!" "Bad Yelp review?" Elena shot her a look. "Someone filed a complaint about the man I feed." Mandy shrugged. "I mean, are you really surprised?" Elena felt heat rising in her chest. "No, I'm not surprised. I'm furious." She stormed into her office, closing the door behind her. She read the letter again and again, fingers trembling. Vagrancy. The word made her sick. He wasn't a criminal, he wasn't a threat, he was just tired. Quiet. Forgotten. And now someone was trying to erase him again. Not this time. That evening, she called a friend from college, Nathan Chang, now a civil rights attorney in Boston. "I'm not asking you to sue the city," she said. "I just need to know my rights." Nathan laughed. "Elena, I was waiting for this day. I knew one day you'd call, and it wouldn't be for wedding flowers or cookie orders." "Send me everything." She did. He called back the next morning. You're fine. Technically, you're allowed to offer food to anyone on your private property, unless he's causing a disturbance, which it sounds like he isn't. They've got nothing. So this is just intimidation. Nathan's voice turned hard. It's more than that. It's systemic bias dressed as procedure. Want me to write a response? No, Eleanor said. I want to write it myself. When she dropped the letter into the mail that afternoon, she felt lighter. Not because the problem was solved, but because she had chosen to fight. 2 days later, J.E.B. appeared again, same bench, same posture. Same silence. But this time, when she set the brown bag beside him, he looked up before she turned away. His eyes met hers. For the first time in 2 years, he spoke. I heard about the letter. Eleanor froze. His voice was low, rough around the edges, like an old record, warm and worn. I didn't mean to bring trouble. She knelt beside the bench, surprised by her own tears. You didn't. He studied her. You stood up. I had to. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. Thank you. And then, after a pause, he added, You don't have to keep doing this. Yes, she said softly. I do. He reached into his coat and handed her something small, a tarnished dog tag, worn and thin. She looked at it. The name engraved was almost illegible, but the initials stood out. J.E.B. I was someone once, he said. You still are. He nodded, eyes shimmering with something ancient and buried. She placed the tag in her pocket, next to the note he'd left her. And as she stood, she realized this story wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs. And it was only just beginning. The bakery was humming with late-morning chatter when Elena walked in, her boots still damp from the rain. The dog tag he had handed her last night felt heavy in her coat pocket, not physically but in meaning. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Tom. Not yet. She needed time to sit with it, to understand what it meant. She slipped behind the counter, tied on her apron, and nodded to Carla, who was restocking the pastry case. Looks like the weather's keeping the coffee drinkers inside, Carla said with a smirk. Better for us, Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. Inside she was spinning. The initials J.E.B. now had a history, a name, sort of. And while the world might not recognize those letters, they were starting to feel monumental to her. The interaction yesterday, brief as it had been, had shifted something between them. His voice still echoed in her ears. I was someone once. She had no doubt he still was. And she was determined to find out who. That night, when the cafe closed and Tom had already left for a work dinner, Eleanor pulled out her laptop and placed the dog tag on the kitchen table beside her. She typed slowly. J.E.B. Military veteran, missing, homeless, nothing specific. She narrowed her search. J.E.B. veteran plus New Hampshire plus missing plus decorated. Still not much. Until one article popped up from 12 years ago. Local news. A fire. A military family. Husband, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, presumed dead after the house went up in flames. The photo was grainy, but she knew that face. Jonathan Elijah Brooks. He had a wife, a child, both had died in the fire. Eleanor sat back in her chair, hand over her mouth. The article described the scene in chilling detail. A late-night blaze in a quiet suburb. Faulty wiring. Quick spread. Neighbors had seen him flee into the flames, trying to reach the second floor. He never came out again, until apparently he did. There had been no follow-up story. No explanation. No interviews. He'd simply vanished from the record. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. So that's why he sat so still, why he never spoke. Why he carried that grief in his silence. He wasn't just a homeless man. He was a ghost the world had forgotten to mourn. She closed the laptop, numb. Part of her wanted to scream, part wanted to cry, and another part felt something close to fury. Why hadn't anyone tried to find him? Why had they let him disappear? At dawn the next day, she was at the cafe an hour earlier than usual. Her hands worked faster, her thoughts racing. By the time she made her way to the alley, the bag in her hand carried more than food. It carried a new awareness. He was there. Same bench, same quiet posture, but something was different today. He looked up as she approached. "I found you," she said softly. He blinked. "I figured you might. Why didn't you tell me who you were?" His eyes scanned her face. "Because who I was doesn't change who I am now. You saved lives. You served. You were honored." "I lost everything." Eleanor sat down beside him. For the first time. Not just hovering. Not just dropping off a meal. She sat. "I know," she whispered. "I read what happened." His voice was low, hollow. "The medals didn't keep the flames out. They didn't keep my wife or my boy alive." A beat of silence passed before he added, "I couldn't save them." She felt tears burning behind her eyes. "But you tried." He looked away. "I don't want pity," he said. "I don't want to be dragged back into a world that already buried me." "I don't belong there anymore. But you belong somewhere." He said nothing. "I've invited you to my wedding," she continued. "Not because of your past or your title, or because I want to make some statement, but because you matter to me. Because you've been part of my life longer than most people going to that ceremony." He finally turned to face her, and this time, his eyes weren't guarded. They were raw. Open. "No one's ever said that to me," he murmured. "Well, they should have," she replied. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out something she hadn't seen before. A small, weathered photo. A woman and a young boy standing in front of a modest house, both smiling wide. "My family," he said. Eleanor took the photo gently, holding it like something sacred. "They'd be proud of you," she said. "I don't know if I believe that." "I do." And then to her surprise, he smiled, just slightly, but enough to feel like sunrise in the middle of winter. Back inside the cafe, the whispers had started again. Mandy had seen her through the back window, sitting beside him. "Did you see that?" she hissed to Carla. "She was on the bench, talking to him, like having a full-on conversation." Carla rolled her eyes. "So what? I'm just saying that it's weird, right?" "No," Carla said flatly. "What's weird is how invested you are in someone else's kindness." Eleanor walked in moments later, catching only the end of it. She didn't speak. She just looked at Mandy, looked long enough to make her shift in place. Then she went back to her work. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Tom sensed something had changed, but didn't ask. Not directly. Instead, he offered small gestures, making dinner, picking up her dry cleaning. Asking about table layouts. It was his way of saying, "I'm still here." But something else stirred in Elena, a sense of purpose. A need not just to see, but to act, to push against the systems that let people like Jonathan Brooks slip through the cracks. She sat with that fire late at night, when the rest of the town was asleep and her thoughts felt loud. And she wondered how many others were out there, how many forgotten heroes, how many good people sitting on cold benches while the world rushed past. She made a decision. One she hadn't even shared with Tom. Not yet. But it was coming. She was going to change more than a life. She was going to change a system. Even if it meant walking into her wedding not just as a bride, but as a woman the world could no longer ignore. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be a celebration. Wine glasses clinked under the soft glow of Edison bulbs, strung across the wooden beams of the Fairhaven Inn's event hall. Laughter echoed through the room, filtered through conversations about honeymoons and baby names. But Eleanor felt detached from it all, like an observer behind glass. Her smile was practiced. Her laughter timed. Inside, her thoughts were pacing restlessly. Across the table, Tom was telling a story about their first trip to Maine, his hand resting lightly on hers. She nodded, even chuckled, but her mind wasn't on the shoreline of Bar Harbor. It was back behind the bakery. Back on that bench. Jonathan Elijah Brooks, the man nobody knew, the man everyone ignored. The man who had saved lives only to be forgotten by the very country he served. Her invitation sat unanswered. It had been days since she left it, tucked gently into the brown paper bag like a secret hope. Every morning since, the bag disappeared as usual, but he never acknowledged it. Not a word. Not a glance. She began to wonder if he'd even read it. "Elena?" She blinked. Tom was looking at her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," she said. "Just tired." She wasn't ready to tell him. Not everything. Not yet. After dessert, Elena stepped outside for air. The night was cool, the stars winking through a canopy of clouds. She stood at the edge of the garden, the scent of lilac in the air, and closed her eyes. She heard footsteps behind her. Not Tom's, lighter, quicker. Amanda. "Eleanor," she said, too cheerfully. "You should come back in." "Your mom is showing everyone that slideshow of you in braces." Elena turned slowly. "Thanks. I just needed a minute." Amanda hesitated, then tilted her head. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What's with that guy? The one behind the bakery?" Eleanor stiffened. "You're always bringing him food," Amanda continued, voice dropping. "And someone said you invited him to the wedding?" Eleanor didn't answer. "I mean, come on. It's weird, right?" "Like, what if he shows up?" Elena looked her square in the eye. "Then I'll be honored." Amanda's smile faltered. "He's not some project, Amanda." "He's a person." Amanda blinked. "Okay, geez. I was just asking." Elena walked past her back toward the door. She'd had enough of polite concern wrapped in judgment. The next morning was cloudy and cold. She arrived at the bakery even earlier than usual, the sun still a rumor beyond the hills. Her shoes echoed in the alley as she turned the corner. He wasn't there. For the first time in over 2 years, the bench was empty. The bag in her hand felt suddenly heavy. She stood there, frozen, scanning the alley like he might materialize from the fog. But there was nothing, only silence and wind. She set the bag down anyway. That day she couldn't concentrate. The pastries were uneven, the espresso steamed too long. Carla noticed. "You all right?" Elena hesitated. "He didn't show this morning." Carla didn't ask who. "He's never missed a day," Elena whispered. "Not one. Maybe he's sick? Maybe. Or maybe something worse." At lunch, she slipped out and checked the alley again. Still empty. That evening, she couldn't eat. She sat in her kitchen, the photo of the house fire still up on her laptop screen. Her eyes drifted to the corner, to the dog tag resting in the dish where she kept her keys. And then she stood. Without even thinking, she grabbed her coat and headed out. She walked the streets of Fairhaven, scanning every corner, every bench, She checked the shelter downtown, the old church that hosted free dinners, the steps of the courthouse. Nothing. By 11 p.m., she was about to give up when she passed the community center and saw something. Someone, slumped under the back awning. She froze. "Jonathan?" she called softly. The figure stirred. He sat up slowly, wincing. She rushed to him.
"You're hurt,"
she said, kneeling beside him.
"I'm fine."
"You're not." He looked at her, eyes tired but alert. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I just couldn't sit there today. Too many memories." She saw it then, his hand wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "You're bleeding." "Just a scrape." She didn't ask how it happened. "Not yet." She took his arm gently. "You're coming with me, Eleanor. No argument." "You're not staying out here like this." He didn't resist. She took him to the bakery, through the side door, past the darkened ovens. She sat him on the prep bench and retrieved the first aid kit. As she cleaned his hand, he watched her with something close to wonder. "You still want me at your wedding?" he asked. She looked up. "I invited you, didn't I? I'm not the man you think I am." She smiled, just slightly. "I think you're a man who's seen more pain than most, and still shows up every day." "That's enough." He didn't reply, but his eyes glistened. After she finished bandaging his hand, he reached into his jacket and pulled something out. It was the envelope, her invitation. "I kept it," he said. She swallowed. "Does that mean you'll come?" He folded it again carefully, then nodded. "I will." A beat passed, a stillness. Then he said, "But not as the man on that bench." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've hidden long enough." And with that, he stood, straighter than she'd ever seen him. In that moment, he wasn't broken. He wasn't invisible. He was Jonathan Elijah Brooks, and he was ready to be seen. The day before the wedding, the town of Fairhaven seemed unusually still, like it was holding its breath. Elena stood at the edge of her bedroom, sunlight filtering through the curtains and brushing against her skin. Her dress, simple yet elegant, hung on the back of her closet door. Across the room, her shoes rested next to a folded scarf, dark green wool, worn but clean. She had taken it from the lost and found bin at the bakery months ago, then handed it to Jonathan on a freezing morning without a word. He wore it every day since. Her heart was pounding. She had barely slept the night before. After Jonathan left the bakery, he didn't say where he was going, only that he would be there. But his eyes, his posture, they told her something had shifted. The man who once sat quietly by the dumpster, blending into the grey of Fairhaven's back alleys, had begun to reclaim his name. Still, Elena had no idea what that truly meant. At noon, she met Tom at the venue, a sprawling country estate with terraced gardens and ivy-covered archways. He was calm as ever, clipboard in hand, talking to the florist about backup plans in case of rain. "You okay?" he asked, eyes scanning her face. She hesitated. "Yeah." He studied her. "You sure?" Eleanor gave a faint smile. "There's something I need to tell you." But before she could continue, her mother appeared from behind a hydrangea bush, waving her phone. "Elena, there's been a mistake with the seating chart. I specifically said Reverend Watkins shouldn't be next to Aunt Leslie." They've hated each other since the baptism in '02. Tom gently touched Elena's arm. "We'll talk later." She nodded, but her chest ached. That evening, Eleanor walked to the bakery alone. The street lamps buzzed softly overhead. She pushed open the side door and entered the darkened kitchen, now quiet after the day's rush. And he was there. Jonathan sat on the bench in the alley, not in rags, not hunched. He wore a dark, clean suit, old but pressed. His boots were polished. The scarf she'd given him was tied neatly beneath his collar. A military pin gleamed just beneath his lapel. "You clean up nice," Elena said, stepping toward him. He gave a soft chuckle.
"It's been a while. Are you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I'll ever be." She hesitated. "Jonathan, I need to ask. Why now?"
After all this time. He looked past her toward the quiet street, his voice low. "Because I'm tired of hiding, and because you gave me the one thing no one else did."
"What's that?" "Permission to exist."
She swallowed hard. "I kept thinking, maybe someone would recognize me," he continued. "Maybe one day a soldier would walk past and stop, but no one ever did. Until you. And you didn't even know who I was. I just knew you mattered." He turned to her then. "I don't want to embarrass you."
"I know what people say, that I'm nothing, that I don't belong."
She stepped closer.
"You belong more than anyone."
He hesitated again, then reached into his coat pocket. "Eleanor, there's something I need to give you." He handed her a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was old, the edges frayed. She unfolded it slowly. It was a photograph. Black and white. Blurry. In it, a younger Jonathan stood in military fatigues, cradling another soldier in his arms, blood staining the man's chest. Smoke billowed behind them. In the corner, scrawled in faded ink, "Fallujah, 2005, Silver Star submission." Elena looked up. "This is you?" He nodded. "They tried to give me a medal. I never accepted it." "Why?" "Because the men I saved didn't make it home." She stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You're a hero." "I was a man doing his job," he said softly. "But after the fire, after I lost my family, I didn't want anyone to know me. I didn't want to be seen." She touched his arm. "But you let me see you." He nodded once, and then quietly, "I'll be there tomorrow. I'll stand where you tell me." "I'll sit where you say." "No," Elena said. "You'll walk me down the aisle." His eyes widened. "What?" "I'm not asking," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm giving you the honor, the same one you gave me every morning for 2 years, by letting me show up. Now it's your turn." He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You really want that?" "I do." He looked away, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm gonna cry," he muttered. "Then we'll cry together." He gave the faintest laugh. "You're stronger than most generals I ever served with, and you're stronger than most people I've ever known." She leaned forward, wrapped her arms around him, and held him tightly. For a man who had spent so long being untouched, unseen, he returned the embrace with a gentleness that nearly shattered her. Tomorrow would change everything. The world would finally see him. But tonight belonged to the two of them. A girl who believed in invisible people, and a soldier who had finally chosen to be seen. The morning of Elena's wedding dawned with a thick, honey-colored light stretching across the hills of Fairhaven. The gardens at Woodridge Manor were already humming with quiet activity. Caterers scurried with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Chairs were being straightened for the 10th time, and the air smelled faintly of fresh lilac and anticipation. Inside the bridal suite, Elena sat alone. Her hair was pinned, her makeup applied with practiced delicacy. Her dress, fitted and flawless, hung like porcelain around her. And yet, beneath it all, she felt the tension coiled tightly in her chest. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling, Not because she was marrying Tom. That part she was sure of. He was steady, kind in a quiet way, and gave her space when she needed it. What unsettled her was what would come before she even reached the altar. She had told no one except Jonathan, not her mother, not Tom, not even her maid of honor. They all expected tradition, a walk down the aisle accompanied by a father figure, or perhaps by no one at all. What they would see instead was a choice, a message. And Elena wasn't sure how they would react when they realized who was walking her down the aisle. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Elena," a voice whispered through the door. It was Tom. She opened the door and found him standing in the hallway, already in his suit, holding 2 mugs of coffee. His tie was slightly crooked. "You okay?" he asked, handing her one of the mugs. She accepted it gratefully and nodded, even though the words weren't true. "I just wanted to see you before everything gets crazy," he said.
I know we said no seeing each other until the ceremony, but I don't know. I just needed to look at you. Eleanor gave a tight smile. I'm glad you came. He looked down at her dress and then back up to her eyes. There's something different in you today, he said. You seem heavier. She hesitated, then met his gaze. There's something I didn't tell you. Tom's face remained still. Okay. Jonathan, the man behind the bakery. He's walking me down the aisle. Tom blinked. What? I invited him. He accepted. Tom took a breath, slow and deliberate. Elena, I trust you, he said finally. I might not understand it, but I trust you. Is there something else I need to know? She looked away. You'll understand soon. He didn't press. He nodded, gave her hand a squeeze, and walked back down the hall. By the time the music started and the guests filled the garden, the mood had settled into one of expected elegance. The chatter was light, the laughter bright. Eleanor's mother moved through the space like a senator at a fundraiser, all smiles and veiled critiques. Darling, who's that man by the gate? She asked one of the ushers, her voice sharp but hushed. Should we call security? The usher glanced toward the driveway. A tall black man stood at the entrance in a pressed suit, hands behind his back, posture unnervingly straight. His boots, military issue, were clean, though aged. The green scarf around his neck contrasted subtly with the dark wool of his coat. I don't know, the usher mumbled. But he's on the guest list. Eleanor watched it all unfold from the top of the garden steps. She stepped through the arched lattice, one hand lightly gripping her bouquet, the other arm offered to Jonathan. He took it silently. The murmurs began immediately. Is that the homeless man from the bakery? What is she doing? Is this some kind of statement? But Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked with purpose, every step deliberate. Jonathan matched her pace, his expression calm, though she could feel the way his fingers pressed gently into her wrist for reassurance. Or maybe it was the other way around. Halfway down the aisle, the crowd hushed. A sudden sound sliced through the quiet, the distant thump of helicopter blades. The officiant glanced skyward, confused. 3 helicopters appeared beyond the trees, flying low and fast. They circled once above the garden, then slowed and hovered. Whispers exploded among the guests. Cell phones lifted into the air. Eleanor's mother's eyes widened and her lips parted in horror. What in the world is happening? Someone gasped. Then came the low rumble of tires on gravel. A line of black SUVs pulled into the drive at the manor's edge. Their doors opened in perfect sequence. Men and women in navy dress uniforms stepped out in pairs, medals glittering under the sun. At the front of the formation stood a tall, silver-haired general. He walked with purpose toward the garden's edge, flanked by honor guards. The music stopped. The officiant stood frozen, unsure of what to do.
The general lifted a small microphone and addressed the gathering.
Ladies and gentlemen, before this ceremony continues, I ask for your attention.
Eleanor gripped Jonathan's arm tighter. He remained stoic, eyes fixed forward.
This man, the general said, gesturing to Jonathan, is Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Robert Ellis.
He served 3 tours overseas. He saved lives, built units from rubble, and walked through fire more times than any of you can count. And then, after all he gave, he came home to a world that forgot him. A gasp rippled through the audience.
He vanished into silence. No medals, no applause, but one woman saw him.
Every day, without knowing who he was. The general turned to Elena, eyes fierce. Miss Elena Hawthorne showed this nation what true dignity looks like.
Not with titles, not with wealth, but with compassion.
With presence. He extended a box from his pocket and opened it. A new medal gleamed inside. She didn't just feed a man.
She restored a soldier's honor. He turned to Jonathan. Sir, it is long overdue. But Jonathan didn't reach for the medal. Instead, he turned to Elena and whispered, "You should have this." The general hesitated, then nodded solemnly.
And as Elena took the medal in her hands, the garden exploded into applause. Not the polite, restrained clapping of ceremony, but something deeper. Real. Raw.
Reverent. Tom stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes glassy, and Elena, for the first time that day, allowed herself to cry. Not from nerves, but from truth revealed. The applause from the ceremony still echoed faintly through the gardens of Woodridge Manor as Elena and Jonathan stepped aside, the medal now resting in her palm, its weight unlike anything she'd ever held before.
It was not the object that moved her. It was what it represented. 2 years of silence, of unnoticed humanity, of quiet dignity wrapped in a scarf and a sandwich bag. As the guests slowly took their seats again, murmuring in disbelief, Elena turned to Jonathan. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. He nodded, but his eyes scanned the crowd like a soldier still gauging threat levels.
You were brave, he said. Braver than I ever was in many ways.
You walked into fire to save people, Elena replied.
And you walked into judgment every day to save one, he said. Then after a pause, he added, They're not so different. Tom stood waiting at the altar, shoulders squared. Eleanor could see it now, the shift in his expression.
At first, there had been confusion, maybe even some betrayal. But now, there was something else behind his gaze. Respect.
And something unspoken, a willingness to let her lead. She leaned to Jonathan. Walk me to him. The crowd remained quiet as they made their way down the rest of the aisle.
No more whispers, no more laughter, just the sound of footsteps on crushed gravel, and the occasional sniffle from someone too overwhelmed to hide their emotions. Even Elena's mother had fallen silent, her lips slightly parted, her eyes darting between her daughter and the man she had once referred to as a risk to the business. When they reached Tom, Jonathan gently placed Elena's hand into his.
Take care of her, he said.
Then after a pause, and listen when she speaks. She sees more than most. Tom nodded, jaw tight with emotion. I know that now. Jonathan turned to leave, but the general raised a hand to stop him. Colonel Ellis, he said formally. We're not finished. Jonathan blinked, unsure. From behind the front row, a tall black man in his late 40s stepped forward, wearing a captain's uniform with medals neatly aligned across his chest. His posture was crisp, but his eyes were red-rimmed. I served under him, the captain said, his voice resonant. I'm Captain Lionel Fraser. Fallujah, 2004. There was a collective intake of breath. He pulled me out of a collapsed building, took shrapnel to the thigh and still carried me through sniper fire. Then disappeared. We thought he'd been discharged quietly. No one could find him. Until today. Jonathan looked as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Lionel turned to the crowd. We owe this man our lives. And this woman? He looked directly at Elena. She gave him back his. The general nodded toward the assembled soldiers. With perfect synchronicity, they moved to form a corridor, 12 in all, standing shoulder to shoulder along the aisle, their white gloves clasped over the hilts of ceremonial sabers. Sir, said the general, will you honor us by joining us for a salute? Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. Elena watched as he stood tall, his back straight, the scar beneath his right temple catching the sun. He stepped between the soldiers, who snapped into position, raising sabers in a silent arch above his head as he passed. Guests rose to their feet instinctively. It was no longer just a wedding. It was a homecoming. Eleanor stood in the quiet that followed, her chest tight. Her mother approached, hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. Eleanor, she said, her voice soft and unsure. I didn't know. No one did, Eleanor replied, but we all should have. Her mother's mouth opened, then closed again. You embarrassed the family, she said, but there was no conviction in it. I honored the truth, Eleanor answered. If that embarrasses us, maybe it's time to change who we are. Tom stepped beside her, placing a hand at the small of her back. Are you ready? The officiant asked. Elena nodded. Let's begin. The ceremony resumed, though now it felt reborn. The words carried a new gravity. Each vow, each sentence, seemed to echo not just with promises, but with something far deeper. An acknowledgement of unseen burdens, of hidden pain, of the beauty in acts that seem small, but ripple outward for years. When the rings were exchanged, when the kiss was sealed, and the couple turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, a gust of wind swept through the garden, scattering a few petals into the air. And from the very back, just beyond the last row of guests, Jonathan stood silently with his hands behind his back, watching not as a forgotten man, but as a soldier returned. As the guests erupted in cheers, Eleanor looked over her shoulder, searching for him, but he was already gone. A breeze caught the edge of her veil as she turned back to Tom. He left, she whispered. Tom smiled gently. He said everything he needed to. And maybe that was true. But Elena knew this wasn't the end. Something had just begun. The reception unfolded under golden string lights and the soft hum of music, but the atmosphere was unlike any wedding Woodridge Manor had ever hosted. There was a reverence in the way guests moved now, a quiet attentiveness that hadn't existed before the ceremony. Conversations were subdued, laughter gentler, eyes no longer focused solely on dresses or canapes, but on something deeper, something they couldn't quite name. Eleanor stood near the edge of the dance floor, her hand loosely wrapped around Tom's, her gaze drifting toward the distant gate where Jonathan Ellis had vanished hours earlier. She hadn't seen him leave, hadn't had the chance to thank him properly, and yet, she understood. His departure was as deliberate and quiet as his presence had always been. He didn't need applause. He had never wanted it. A waiter approached with a folded napkin. He asked me to give this to you, the young man said, handing it over. Elena took it carefully, her heart already aching before she unfolded the familiar paper. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, but unmistakably his. There's nothing more powerful than being seen. Thank you for seeing me. Now go build something bigger than both of us. She pressed the napkin to her chest, her breath catching. Tom noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. Another note, he asked gently. She nodded. The last one, I think. He squeezed her hand. Then let's make sure it doesn't end here. 2 weeks later, Eleanor sat in the back room of her family's bakery, the same kitchen she'd walked through every morning for years. But everything had changed. Not the smell of warm yeast or the sound of kneading dough, but the intention behind it. Across the table from her sat Maribel, her once skeptical co-worker, now a quiet ally. Together, they were planning something new.
You really think it'll work?
Maribel asked, flipping through a stack of notes.
I don't know,
Eleanor admitted.
but I know it matters.
That's enough to start. They weren't building a shelter or a non-profit. They were creating what Elena called a visibility space, a table where no questions were asked, no explanations required. Anyone could come. Sit. Be served. Be seen. No forms, no IDs, just dignity. Elena's parents hadn't been thrilled. Her mother especially had struggled to hide her distaste for the idea, calling it idealistic and unrealistic. But her father had simply handed her a set of keys one morning and said, "If you're going to feed people, make sure the oven's hot by 4. That was his version of support. Word of the wedding had traveled fast in town, and so had the story of the mysterious man in the scarf and the row of saluting soldiers. For weeks, the bakery saw a wave of unfamiliar customers, some just curious, others hopeful, but most simply came to talk. An older man in a baseball cap stopped Elena on the sidewalk. "I served with a man like him once," he said. "I walked past guys like that for years after. Never looked twice."
I won't make that mistake again. Another day, a teenager came by with a donation envelope, 5 wrinkled bills and a note. "This is all I have. I saw the video. Thank you." A video had surfaced, taken by one of the guests during the ceremony.
It had gone viral quietly, without her consent, showing the moment Jonathan walked her down the aisle and the honor guard raised their sabers in salute. The video was captioned simply, "She fed him for 2 years. On her wedding day, the nation stood to honor him." Elena hated the idea of going viral,